The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was designed to make lesser species feel small. Its ceiling stretched a mile high, carved from living crystal that pulsed softly with the light of distant stars. Banners from 100 empires fluttered above, each one a reminder of the power gathered in that single room. And beneath that overwhelming sky, a single human walked alone. His name was Adrian Kane, envoy of Earth, diplomat, representative, and to most in the galaxy, a man without teeth. Humanity had spent centuries rebuilding after the War of Cinders, a brutal conflict that had nearly wiped them from the stars. They had learned humility. They had learned patience. And now they had returned to this place to seek peace and cooperation. But peace was not what everyone wanted. As Adrian's boots echoed on the polished obsidian floor, thousands of alien eyes turned to him, some curious, some hostile, some filled with the cold hatred that only memory could create. Among the Council's elders, humanity's name was a wound that had never healed. Long ago, humans had burned fleets, toppled empires, and left scars on the galaxy that would never fade. "You are late, Envoy Kane," hissed High Chancellor Zelthar of the Krelek Dominion. His voice was like metal scraping stone. "Did your people forget how to keep time after they lost their place among civilized species?" Adrian didn't flinch. He offered a polite nod. "I prefer to arrive exactly when I'm needed." A ripple of amusement passed through the chamber, but beneath it lurked something darker. The Krelek had hated humanity for generations. They had lost millions in the old wars, and they had never forgiven it. Adrian knew that hatred well. It was the reason Earth's diplomats were watched, followed, and sometimes never returned home. He stopped at the center of the chamber and spoke, his voice steady and calm. "I come on behalf of Earth. We offer trade, partnership, and peace. We have changed. We no longer wish for conquest. We wish to stand among you as equals." The words echoed through the hall. Some listened, some scoffed, and some, like the Krelek, smiled not with warmth but with something far colder. From the shadows near the council seats, movement flickered too fast for most eyes. Adrian didn't need to see it to know. His instincts screamed, honed from a lifetime he had sworn was behind him. A plasma blade flashed toward his throat. Time slowed. The assassin was quicker than most soldiers, but Adrian was quicker. His hand shot up, fingers closing around the attacker's wrist mid-strike. A sharp twist, a crack. The blade clattered to the floor, and the assassin screamed. Two more shapes lunged from the balcony. Adrian moved before they did, a step left, a palm strike to the first one's chest, a heel kick that sent the second crashing into a pillar. They fell before they could even register their mistake. The chamber exploded into chaos. "Guards! Assassins! Protect the council!" But there was nothing left to protect them from. Adrian stood in the center of the room, his coat slightly torn, his breath steady. Around him lay three would-be killers, groaning and broken. He bent down, picked up the plasma blade, and looked up at the council with calm, unshaken eyes. "This is the welcome you offer a peaceful envoy." Chancellor Zelthar rose, his mandibles twitching nervously. You should not have been able to stop them." "No," Adrian said softly, "I shouldn't." He turned and walked toward the chamber doors. Every step echoed like thunder now, and with each one the air grew heavier. He stopped and looked back over his shoulder, his voice low but cutting through the silence like a blade. "You made a mistake," he said. "You thought I was just a diplomat." Zelthar's eyes narrowed. "Then what are you?" Adrian's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Once," he said, "they called me Baba Yaga." A hush fell over the hall. The words hit like a weapon. Even those too young to remember the war had heard that name whispered in fear. Baba Yaga, the ghost, the reaper, the human weapon who had ended fleets single-handedly and vanished before anyone could stop him. It was a myth told to soldiers before battle and to children before bed. And now that myth was standing in front of them, alive. "I came here for peace," Adrian said quietly. "But if you bring war to Earth again, if you lay one hand on our people," he glanced down at the fallen assassins, "I will remind you what that name means." He dropped the plasma blade at his feet and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind silence, not the silence of diplomacy, but the silence of fear. Because in their arrogance, they had attacked the human envoy, and they had just woken the monster they thought was gone. The Galactic Council tried to bury the incident before the stars had even set. News of assassins striking in the heart of the council chamber would shake the balance of power, and they could not allow that. Official statements were written, edited, and rewritten again. The story they released to the press was simple, a minor security breach, quickly contained. No mention of who the target was. No mention of how easily he had dismantled 3 trained killers with his bare hands. But rumors have their own wings, and they flew faster than any official lie. Across the stations and trade routes, in the dark corners of cantinas and the busy decks of freighters, people whispered of the human envoy who had crushed an assassination attempt without blinking. Some said he had snapped a warrior's spine with 2 fingers. Others swore they saw his eyes turn cold as ice, like a predator that had once hunted gods. And always the same name followed the stories, Baba Yaga. Adrian Kane ignored the whispers. He had no interest in becoming a ghost again. For years, he had hidden that part of himself, the part that had turned entire battlefields into graves, the part that had kept Earth alive when the galaxy wanted it dead. He had sworn to bury Baba Yaga the day the war ended. But the attempt on his life had changed everything. That night, alone in his diplomatic quarters on the station, Adrian stared out at the sea of stars beyond the window. His reflection stared back, older now, more tired. Yet the eyes were the same, cold, calculating, dangerous. "They know," he murmured to himself. "Someone remembers." The door chimed. Adrian didn't turn. "Enter." A tall woman in a sharp uniform stepped inside. Her face was all business, but her eyes betrayed concern. Commander Alira Voss, Earth's military liaison to the Council, had served with Adrian long ago. She knew who he had been. She knew what he could still become. "They're spinning the story," she said, "calling it a random extremist act, but we both know better." "Of course," Adrian replied quietly. "It was coordinated military precision. The way they moved, the timing, this wasn't hatred, it was a message." Alira nodded grimly. "And we intercepted communications on the Krelek channels. They're calling for a vote to revoke Earth's membership. If they succeed, we'll be isolated, vulnerable." "Then they're making their move," Adrian said, his voice low. "And they're afraid." "Afraid," Alira frowned. "Of what?" "Of us," he said simply. "Afraid that the species they tried to erase still has teeth." He turned from the window and faced her fully. The soft-spoken Envoy was gone now. The man who looked back at her was the one the galaxy had tried to forget, the one who never lost a war. "Alira," he said calmly, "I want a list. Every council member who voted against us in the last 3 sessions, every corporation funding anti-human propaganda, every Krelek officer who's been promoted in the last 6 months." Her eyes widened. "You're planning something." "I'm preparing," he corrected, "because this is bigger than an assassination. This is the start of a campaign. They're moving pieces on the board, and I intend to move mine." The next day, Adrian returned to the council chamber. The atmosphere had changed. The same beings who had mocked him now avoided his gaze. Some were afraid, others were calculating. But a few, the ones who truly understood what had happened, glared at him with hatred. "Envoy Kane," Chancellor Zelthar hissed from his throne, "your presence here has caused great disruption. The safety of this council is our highest priority. Perhaps it would be best if you returned to Earth." A subtle murmur rippled through the hall. It was not a suggestion. It was an expulsion dressed in diplomatic language. Adrian stepped forward slowly, each footstep echoing against the cold stone floor. "You think removing me will solve your problem?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable edge. "You think assassins and politics will keep Earth silent?" "Your kind is a danger to peace," Zelthar snapped. "The galaxy will never forget what you did." "Good," Adrian said, and his voice dropped to a whisper that made the entire chamber go still. "Because if you force us back into the shadows, we'll show you what we can do." The silence that followed was suffocating. Somewhere deep inside, every delegate felt the weight of those words, a warning, not a threat. Adrian left the chamber without another word. Outside, the corridors were filled with cameras and reporters. Questions flew like bullets, but he ignored them all. He had no message for the public, not yet. In the privacy of his shuttle, he closed his eyes and let the darkness settle in his chest. The shadows he had tried to bury were rising again. The galaxy thought they were playing a political game. They didn't understand. This wasn't politics anymore. This was war, and they had just woken the man who never lost one. The stars above the Galactic Council station burned cold and distant. But inside Adrian Kane's heart, a storm was beginning to rise. He had spent a lifetime trying to bury the part of himself that the galaxy once feared, the part that had earned him the name Baba Yaga. But now that part stirred again, restless and awake. The assassination attempt had been more than a warning. It had been a declaration. And Adrian knew what declarations demanded: answers. He no longer walked the halls of the station as a diplomat. He moved like a shadow, unseen and silent. Every glance, every conversation, every whisper, he collected them all. A stray word from a nervous aide, a cargo manifest arriving from an unusual source, a data packet sent at an odd hour, small pieces that meant nothing alone but everything together. By the third day, a picture had started to form. The assassins had not acted alone. They were part of something bigger, a hidden alliance between several species led by the Krelek Dominion. Their plan was simple and terrifying: frame humanity for destabilizing the Council, force them out, and then cut them off from all trade and travel. Within a decade, Earth would be isolated and helpless. But they had made one mistake. They had attacked Adrian Kane, and Adrian Kane was not the kind of man who waited to be hunted. Late one night, he walked into a dimly lit storage bay on the lower levels of the station. A single figure waited for him, a small, four-armed smuggler named Rylix, known for selling information to the highest bidder. Rylix flinched when he saw who had come. "I don't sell to humans," Rylix hissed. Adrian stepped closer. "You do now." The smuggler tried to stand tall, but one look into Adrian's cold eyes broke his courage. "What do you want?" "Names," Adrian said softly. "The ones behind the attack, the ones planning Earth's destruction." Rylix hesitated. "That's dangerous knowledge. People disappear for less." Adrian's gaze didn't waver. "And you'll disappear for nothing if you lie to me." The smuggler swallowed hard and handed over a small data chip. "I don't know much, but there's a meeting. Off-grid, black site on the moons of Verath, Krelek generals, corporate interests. They're calling it Project Silence." "Project Silence," Adrian repeated, turning the name over like a blade in his mind. "Thank you." He turned to leave, but Rylix called after him. "Kane, if you go there, you won't come back. They're expecting assassins, not diplomats." Adrian paused at the door and looked back with a faint, dangerous smile. "Then I won't disappoint them." The journey to Verath was long and lonely. Adrian went alone, taking a small stealth shuttle disguised as a cargo freighter. Officially, the envoy from Earth was still on the Council station, resting after the attempt on his life. In truth, he was crossing light years to strike at the heart of a conspiracy that threatened everything he had sworn to protect. When he reached the frozen moons, he found the facility exactly where Rylix had said it would be, hidden beneath a canyon, shielded from scanners and guarded by mercenaries. From orbit, it looked impenetrable, but Adrian had broken into worse. Under the cover of night, he slipped through their defenses like smoke. Cameras failed without warning. Guards vanished into shadows. Locked doors opened without a sound. It was as if the base itself was haunted. At the heart of the facility, a group of high-ranking Krelek and their allies sat around a table, speaking in hushed voices. Holograms of Earth's solar system floated above them. They spoke of embargoes, invasions, and puppet governments, plans that would erase humanity from the galactic stage. Adrian listened from the rafters above, every word carving deeper into his resolve. Then he saw something that stopped his breath: a list of names. Earth officials, politicians, traitors. There were humans involved too. This was bigger than revenge. It was treason. Suddenly an alarm blared. A guard had found a broken door. The room exploded into chaos. "Intruder!" someone shouted. "Seal the exits." Adrian moved before they could react. He dropped from the ceiling like a phantom, landing in the center of the room. In one swift motion, he disarmed the nearest guard, spun the weapon, and aimed it at the table. "Good evening," he said calmly. "I hear you've been talking about my planet." Panic swept the room. Some reached for weapons. They never got the chance. Adrian moved like a storm, every step precise, every strike lethal. The guards fell one by one, their weapons useless against the speed and fury of the man they had tried to kill. Within minutes, the room was silent. Only the conspirators remained, trembling and unarmed. Adrian walked to the table and picked up the list of names. He slipped it into his pocket. "Tell your masters," he said coldly. "Earth is not prey, and I am not a diplomat. I am the consequence you prayed would never come." When Adrian left Verath, the base was in flames. The galaxy would soon learn that someone had struck at the heart of Project Silence, though few would know who. But those who did would remember the stories of the man who disappeared and left nothing but ashes behind. And for the first time in decades, the name Baba Yaga began to spread again. It crept through the networks, whispered in war rooms and council chambers. A ghost had returned, and he was hunting. The flames of Verath burned for days. By the time the Galactic Council heard of the attack, the secret facility was nothing but twisted metal and smoke drifting into the black sky. Thousands of encrypted files had been stolen, and dozens of high-ranking officials had vanished without a trace. No one knew who had done it, but everyone had a theory, and one name kept surfacing in every whisper: Baba Yaga. The galaxy had believed that legend was dead. They had believed Adrian Kane had laid his ghosts to rest. Now they were terrified to learn that the ghost was very much alive, and he was angry. Adrian returned to the council station under the cover of silence. Officially, he had never left. To the public, he was still the calm, polite envoy of Earth, recovering from a recent assassination attempt. But in the shadows, he was moving pieces on the board. The stolen files from Verath revealed more than he had feared. The conspiracy was vast. Entire governments, corporate powers, and rogue fleets were part of Project Silence. They weren't just trying to isolate Earth. They were preparing for war. Earth's leaders back home sent cautious messages, urging Adrian to slow down, to let diplomacy do its work. But he knew diplomacy would fail. The enemy was too deep, too ready. They weren't planning to negotiate, they were planning to strike. And if they struck first, humanity might never rise again. So Adrian decided he would not wait for the storm. He would become the storm. The first target was a black site shipyard hidden within the gas clouds of Orinth Prime. It was there that Project Silence was building a new fleet, stealth cruisers designed to bypass Earth's defenses. Adrian's intelligence confirmed the fleet would be ready within 6 months. That was too soon. With a small team of trusted operatives, veterans of wars long past, Adrian infiltrated the shipyard under false codes. The enemy never saw them coming. Explosives planted in critical sections detonated simultaneously, tearing the facility apart. Dozens of unfinished ships exploded before they could ever launch. Next came the financial networks. Adrian leaked evidence of Project Silence to the Galactic press, carefully, strategically. Names of corrupt senators, secret transactions, illegal weapons shipments. Entire economies collapsed overnight as investors fled from exposed conspirators. The once powerful alliance behind Project Silence was bleeding from within. But with every victory, the danger grew. The enemies of Earth were no longer hiding. They declared Adrian Kane a terrorist. Bounties were placed on his head in every major system. Shadow fleets hunted for him. Council members called for his execution. The Krelek Dominion even dispatched their elite assassins, the same group that had once been tasked with hunting down humanity's deadliest operatives. Adrian knew they were coming, and he welcomed it. One night, as his ship drifted silently through the outer rim, an alarm blared. 3 warships had dropped out of warp, surrounding him. Their weapons were charged, their messages short and clear: surrender or die. Adrian didn't surrender. The battle was brutal. His ship was smaller and weaker, but he was smarter. He lured them into the gravity well of a nearby moon, where their larger ships struggled to maneuver. He disabled one with a precise missile strike to its engines, rammed another into a debris field, and boarded the third personally. The fight inside was fast and savage, close quarters combat in dark corridors. When the smoke cleared, all 3 warships were crippled, their crews unconscious or gone. Adrian stood on the bridge of the captured ship, his breath heavy but steady. He looked out at the stars and felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. This was who he was. This was who he had always been. But even as he struck blow after blow, Adrian knew he was fighting time. Project Silence wasn't stopping. It was evolving. The enemy had begun targeting Earth's allies, sabotaging trade routes and assassinating ambassadors. They were trying to isolate humanity again, not with diplomacy, but with fear. The Council grew divided. Some demanded immediate action against Earth, claiming Adrian's actions were acts of war. Others began to question the conspiracy they had once ignored. The balance of power was shifting, and Adrian's war in the shadows was forcing the galaxy to choose a side. One night, alone on the bridge of his ship, Adrian stared at a hologram of Earth. He traced the outlines of its continents with his finger, remembering the cities he had sworn to protect. He whispered to himself, "They want a monster, then a monster is what they'll get." Far across the galaxy, in a dark chamber beneath the Krelek capital, the leaders of Project Silence gathered in anger. "He's destroyed our fleet," one growled. "He's exposing our networks," another hissed. He's turning the council against us. Zelthar slammed a claw against the table. Then we end him, not as a symbol, not as a soldier, as a species. We burn Earth from its skis, we erase its name from the stars. A chill settled over the room. War was coming, a war not of soldiers and ships, but of vengeance and survival. And at the heart of it all stood Adrian Kane, the man they had called Baba Yaga, the man they had underestimated, the man who was no longer just defending humanity. He was preparing to unleash it. The galaxy was trembling. Word of Adrian Kane's silent war had spread farther than any rumor. Entire fleets had been destroyed. Secret plans were exposed. Empires that once called Earth weak now spoke its name with fear. And in every council chamber, one question burned hotter than any star: how could one man bring so many powers to their knees? The answer was simple. They had underestimated Baba Yaga. But the enemies of Earth were far from defeated. Their anger had become desperation, and desperation had turned into fury. The leaders of Project Silence gathered in the dark heart of the Krelek Dominion and agreed on a single, monstrous decision. If they could not stop Adrian Kane, they would strike where it hurt most. They would strike Earth itself. It began with whispers, strange movements in distant sectors, fleets vanishing from their patrol routes, corporate transports rerouted with no explanation. Adrian noticed them first. His contacts sent fragmented messages: Krelek fleets mobilizing, unknown armada assembling near the Epsilon Rift, war engines heading toward Sol. He didn't sleep that night. He stood on the bridge of his ship, staring at the projection of Earth glowing softly in the darkness. The blue and green world was more than just his home. It was everything he had ever fought for. And now it was in danger again. "They're coming," he whispered, "and they won't stop until Earth is dust." The attack began without warning. Dozens of enemy warships dropped out of hyperspace near Mars, blasting through Earth's outer defenses. Automated satellites exploded in flames. The orbital stations were torn apart. Civilian colonies screamed for help as invasion ships descended like fire from the heavens. It was the largest military assault since the War of Cinders, and it was meant to end humanity forever. On Earth, panic spread like wildfire. Governments scrambled to organize defenses. Old alliances were reactivated overnight. Civilian ships were turned into gun platforms, and shipyards worked without rest to launch anything that could fly. But against the might of Project Silence, it still felt like trying to stop a hurricane with bare hands. Adrian returned home as fast as he could. His ship entered orbit in the middle of the chaos. Fires burned across the surface of Mars. The moon was littered with wreckage, and Earth itself, beautiful, fragile Earth, was now under siege. He didn't hesitate. He went straight to the unified command bunker under Geneva, where generals and politicians argued over impossible plans. The moment he walked in, the room went silent. "You shouldn't be here," one admiral said. "You're the reason they're attacking." "Then I'll be the reason they stop," Adrian replied coldly. "You're a diplomat," another shouted. "You can't lead a war." Adrian stepped closer, his eyes as sharp as the day he earned his name. "I am not a diplomat," he said softly. "I am the man they fear, and right now fear is the only weapon we have." No one argued after that. Under Adrian's command, humanity's defenses transformed. He didn't fight like a politician, he fought like a ghost. Fleets were repositioned into ambush zones. Civilian ships were converted into decoys, luring enemy forces into traps. Sabotage teams were sent deep behind enemy lines. Every move was brutal, precise, and terrifying. And for the first time since the invasion began, the enemy started losing ground. But victory came at a cost. Cities burned. Millions fled their homes. Entire colonies were lost in desperate holding actions. Every message from the front carried the names of the fallen. Adrian read them all. He memorized them, and each one hardened his resolve. During one late-night briefing, Admiral Zhao approached him quietly. "You can't save everyone," she said gently. "I know," Adrian replied, his voice heavy, "but I can make sure they don't die for nothing." Weeks turned into months. The war dragged on, fierce and merciless, yet something had changed. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. They were fighting to win. The galaxy had expected fear, surrender, and despair. Instead, they faced defiance. They faced fury. They faced Baba Yaga. And slowly, the tide began to turn. One by one, enemy fleets fell back. The rebellion Adrian had sparked across the stars, small colonies rising against the Krelek corporate allies betraying their masters, now erupted into full-scale revolts. The mighty alliance behind Project Silence was collapsing from within, unable to sustain its war. But even as victory seemed near, Adrian knew the fight was far from over. The enemy still had one weapon left, their pride. They would not accept defeat. They would rather burn the galaxy to ashes than admit they had failed. And so, deep in enemy territory, preparations began for one final strike, a weapon powerful enough to end Earth in a single blow. Adrian didn't know when or where they would use it, but he knew one thing: they would try. And when they did, he would be ready. Standing alone on the observation deck of the Orbital Command Center, Adrian looked down at Earth, battered, wounded, but still standing. The night sky burned with the light of distant battles, and the ground below was scarred by war. But humanity was alive. Humanity was fighting. "They wanted to erase us," he whispered. "Instead, they reminded us who we are." For the first time in years, he allowed himself a small, tired smile. The galaxy had unleashed its wrath upon Earth, and Earth had not broken. But the final battle was coming, and Adrian Kane, the Baba Yaga, was already planning how to end it. The galaxy that once mocked humanity now whispered its name with fear. The enemy fleets that once advanced without challenge now hesitated at the edge of Earth's defenses. But Adrian Kane knew better than anyone fear alone would not win this war. Fear was a tool, not a shield. And as long as Project Silence lived, humanity was still in danger. The enemy had suffered heavy losses. Dozens of their fleets were gone, their leaders exposed, their plans shattered. But they still had one last weapon, a weapon so powerful it could erase an entire planet in a single strike. It was called the Oblivion Spear, a planet killer built in the far reaches of the Krelek Dominion. It was not just a weapon of war, it was a weapon of extermination. And it was coming for Earth. Adrian stared at the intelligence report glowing on the screen before him. The weapon was nearly complete. In 2 weeks, it would be ready to fire. And once it fired, nothing, no shield, no fleet, no miracle could save his home. He stood silently for a long time, his hands clasped behind his back. Memories of Earth flashed before his eyes, the rivers and forests, the cities filled with laughter, the faces of people who still believed in peace. He had fought this war for them. He had sacrificed everything for them, and he would not fail them now. "We can't wait for them to strike," he said quietly. "We end this before it begins." The plan Adrian proposed to the Unified Command was madness. Even the most hardened generals called it suicide. Infiltrate the heart of the Dominion. Board the heavily guarded construction platform. Destroy the Oblivion Spear before it could fire. "It's impossible," Admiral Zhao argued during the briefing. "The base is deep inside enemy territory. No one gets in and out alive." "Then I won't come back," Adrian replied calmly. The room fell silent. They all knew what that meant. This was not a mission of victory, it was a mission of sacrifice. But Adrian didn't hesitate. He had been preparing for this his entire life. All the pain, the scars, the battles, they had led him to this moment. He had once been a ghost that haunted battlefields. Now he would become a ghost that saved a world. A week later, Adrian's ship slipped into enemy space under the cover of darkness. He was not alone. A small strike team of Earth's best operatives accompanied him. They were soldiers, spies, and assassins, all veterans of wars that had shaped history. And every single one of them had volunteered, knowing they might never return. "Are you ready for this?" asked Lieutenant Mira, a former Black Ops agent who had served under Adrian years ago. He looked out at the stars, his face calm and unreadable. "I've been ready for this since the day they called me Baba Yaga." They approached the enemy platform disguised as a disabled freighter. Automated scanners let them pass. Once inside the defense perimeter, they deployed in silence, slipping through the labyrinth of steel and shadow that surrounded the weapon. Every hallway was filled with guards, every door was sealed. Every second brought them closer to discovery. But Adrian moved like a ghost, every step calculated, every motion precise. He remembered every lesson, every instinct honed over decades of war. And one by one, the obstacles fell. Finally, they reached the weapon's core, a vast chamber filled with humming energy and towering machinery. At its center pulsed the Oblivion Spear, its launch sequence already underway. They had less than an hour before it fired. "Charges planted," Mira reported. "We can blow it from here." Adrian shook his head. "Not enough. The containment field will hold. We have to trigger an overload from inside the core. That's a one-way trip, Mira whispered. I know. The team protested, but Adrian didn't listen. This was his mission, his burden, his choice. He stepped into the chamber alone, the glow of the weapon bathing him in blue light. As he accessed the control systems, alarms began to wail. Enemy soldiers poured into the room, shouting in rage. Adrian moved like lightning, taking cover, firing precise shots, buying seconds, every second they needed. The countdown reached 2 minutes. The energy levels surged. The weapon screamed with unstable power. Adrian's hands danced over the console, rerouting systems, forcing the overload. He felt the floor shake beneath his feet as the weapon began to tear itself apart. Adrian, Mira shouted over the comm, "Get out of there." He smiled faintly, "Not this time." Outside, the strike team raced to their ship. The platform was crumbling, explosions rippling across its surface. They barely made it to safety before the entire facility vanished in a single, blinding burst of light. The Oblivion Spear was gone, and with it, the enemy's last hope of victory. But Adrian Kane did not return. For days, humanity mourned. News of his sacrifice spread across the stars. On Earth, people gathered in silence beneath the open sky, whispering his name. Even among their enemies, there was awe. The man they had feared had destroyed their greatest weapon, alone. They had tried to kill the Envoy. They had tried to break the legend. And in the end, Baba Yaga had written his final chapter with fire. But the war was not over. Adrian's death had changed everything. The Dominion was broken, its fleets scattered, its leaders in hiding. And for the first time, humanity saw the end of this long nightmare. The man was gone, but his shadow still walked among the stars, a reminder that Earth would never kneel. The explosion of the Oblivion Spear was seen across the stars. A blinding light burned in the darkness of space, the death of the most powerful weapon ever built. With it died the last hope of Project Silence. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as the impossible happened. The weapon that was supposed to erase Earth was gone, destroyed by one man. That man, Adrian Kane, the Baba Yaga, did not return. For days, humanity refused to believe it. They searched every fragment of the ruined platform, scanned every signal, every escape pod, every corner of space. But there was no trace. Adrian had vanished with the weapon he destroyed. It was as if the universe itself had claimed him. Yet even in his absence, his presence was everywhere. On Earth, the cities that had burned under the enemy's attacks began to rebuild. People gathered in the streets, not to mourn, but to remember. Children who had never known war learned his name in school. Soldiers spoke of him in hushed voices, calling him the man who stood when no one else could. And leaders, even those who had once doubted humanity, now spoke of him as a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable will. The galaxy, too, had changed. Without their ultimate weapon, the Krelek Dominion was fractured. Their fleets were scattered and demoralized. Many of their allies, terrified by the legend of Baba Yaga, abandoned them. The coalition behind Project Silence crumbled in weeks. Their leaders fled, their armies surrendered, and their power dissolved. Peace, something humanity had not dared to dream of, was finally within reach. Months later, a new Galactic Council gathered. But this time, it was different. The chamber that once echoed with contempt for Earth now fell silent as the flag of humanity was raised beside the banners of the great powers. No one mocked. No one hissed. Every species in that hall had seen what humans could endure and what they could become when pushed too far. High Chancellor Zelthar, once humanity's loudest enemy, stood before the council and spoke words no one had expected to hear. The galaxy owes its peace to the actions of a single human, he admitted. The envoy we sought to silence has become the voice that binds us all. Adrian Kane, may his name live forever. In that moment, there were no enemies, no rivals, no conquerors. There were only survivors, beings who had seen the worst of war and now wished for something better. Back on Earth, life slowly returned to normal. The skies cleared, the cities shone again, children played under the stars without fear, yet everywhere reminders of Adrian's sacrifice remained. Statues were raised in his honor, not as a warrior but as a protector. Streets, ships, and schools bore his name. And in the great capital of Geneva, a memorial was built at the heart of the city. Its inscription was simple. He walked into the darkness so we could live in the light. One evening, Lieutenant Mira, the Black Ops agent who had fought beside Adrian on his final mission, visited the memorial. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. She placed a small medal, the one Adrian had given her years ago, at the base of the monument and stood in silence. "You always said you weren't a hero," she whispered. "But you were wrong, you were the greatest of us." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. She knew Adrian would not have wanted statues or praise. He had never fought for glory. He had fought for the people, the children laughing in the streets, the farmers rebuilding their homes, the future that now had a chance to exist. Years passed. The wounds of war healed, and the galaxy entered an age of cooperation unlike any before. Trade flourished. New alliances formed. Old grudges faded. Humanity, once considered a dangerous outsider, became one of the pillars of peace. But even as the galaxy moved forward, the legend of Baba Yaga lived on. It was told in every language, in every world, the story of the envoy who had been attacked, underestimated, and hunted, and who had become the savior of them all. Fathers told their children about the man who stood alone against empires. Soldiers carried his memory into battle, believing that as long as they fought with his spirit, they could never be defeated. And somewhere, deep in the hearts of all who had survived the war, a quiet promise lived: never again. Never again would humanity bow. Never again would they be underestimated. Never again would they forget the cost of peace. One night, under a sky filled with stars, an old woman told the story to her grandson. He listened with wide eyes as she spoke of the envoy who caught assassins with his bare hands, who brought empires to their knees, and who walked into the fire to save his world. "Grandma," the boy asked softly, "do you think he's really gone?" The woman smiled, her eyes glistening. "Legends don't die, my dear, they live in all of us, and as long as we remember what he stood for, he's still here." The boy looked up at the stars, and for a moment he swore he saw a shadow move among them, a lone figure, walking silently, watching over the galaxy he had saved. And maybe, just maybe, the Baba Yaga was still out there.